Hey, good morning, everyone. It's Monday, August 26th. It's the last week of summer, and it's time for another episode of Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia. Today's topic, it's our 20th episode. So we're here to celebrate with a couple of members from our Consultants Network, DarConte and Bruce Rosenthal. And as always, Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia is brought to you by Rogue Tulips, 501c Consulting and Association Management Services. Check us out at roguetulips.com. And we here at Rogue Tulips are a proud supporter of the 501c League, a virtual membership organization for everyone in the 501c community and the people who love them. You can check out the league at the501cleague.net. So here we are this morning. It's a lovely Monday morning here. We're virtual. We're here in the DC area, Florida, and North Carolina. And as always, I am Cecilia Supp. I am the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips. And I'm here with my co-host and friend and colleague, Agnes. Agnes, would you like to say hello?
Sure, Cecilia. Hello and good afternoon to our global audience, or good morning, whatever side of the world that you're in. My name is Agnes Amos Coleman. I'm an author and I'm a consultant with Rogue Tulip. Over to you, Cecilia.
Thanks, Agnes. And we're here with two members of our Consultants Network, DarConte and Bruce Rosenthal. Bruce is a returning guest on the show. So Bruce, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon. Glad to be here. I've worked with nonprofit organizations and associations throughout my career. And the last 3 years, I've been consulting with organizations on how they can leverage corporate sponsorships to increase revenue and member value, and also working with Rogue Tulips.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. And Anne is an original member of our Consultants Network, but a first-time guest. So welcome, Anne, and please introduce yourself.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me this morning, Cecilia and Agnes. I am primarily a government relations and advocacy consultant, and I have about 30 years of working with organizations in the private sector, public sector, and in particular in the association world. I am a CAE, a Certified Association Exec, and also serve as the immediate past chair of the Government Relations Section Council for ASAE.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thanks for joining us. Yeah, and so Agnes and I, it's our 20th episode, and we were talking a couple weeks ago about how far we've come since our first one, where you can hear us saying, is it on? Is it recording? And Bruce asked if we could recap a few of the topics we've covered. Our first 3 episodes were about Agnes's book, Transforming Business with Godly Governance, which shares 9 leadership characteristics that it doesn't matter what your spiritual practice is, anybody can apply to make the world a better place. And Agnes and I had used to have a lot of conversations on that area, and she wrote a book about it. So it was like great to talk about that. We've talked about things like fundraising with one of our partners, David Phillips from CBS Funds. We've talked about data analysis with Rob Miller from Gravitate Solutions, who's another partner of ours. We've had Kathy Paleon, who's a women's leadership executive coach. And Kathy and I are also now working together on other women's leadership activities via LinkedIn. We've talked about the RFP process. We've talked about strategic planning. We've talked about international relations. Agnes, what are some of the hits I've missed?
Well, I think you've pretty much covered everything, Cecilia. Our main focus has been really looking at the best practices that impact 501c and its community on a global scale, regardless of what they're being called globally, but really just looking at all these issues. And these are some of the issues we wish to continue to consider as we evolve this program. So that it can become a platform for professional development for all our stakeholders and our viewers all over the world.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Agnes. A lot of people have started using this series as professional development bites for their staff. So we encourage you to check it out. You can get the link to Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia at the Rogue Tulips website, or you can just go to YouTube and search for Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia. The channel is under my name, Cecilia Supp, but our playlist is there and is pretty much devoted to Rogue Tulips. So one of the things we also focus on at Rogue Tulips is we believe smaller associations, small staff, small budget, deserve the opportunity to have high quality services in a budget friendly way. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the areas that we believe small associations should focus on and keep in mind, and realize that yes, you too can and should do this. So we'd like to start with Anne, since she's the first time guest, and talk a little bit about government relations and the smaller association.
Thanks, Cecilia. You know, it's interesting. You mentioned, Agnes, that associations make the world a better place. You're absolutely correct. And small associations are, as we discussed, as you mentioned, Cecilia, especially challenged in their resources. And as a government relations consultant and somebody who has been in the practice for over 30 years, one of the things that I find is that small associations in particular believe that government relations is something that they don't necessarily need to do until they're in a defensive posture and are potentially being attacked by other groups in either the state or the federal process. So I'm a big believer that it takes a lot to sometimes make sure that government relations is a priority. And there are a lot of ways in which you can do government relations that don't necessarily have to be lobbying per se, but at least monitoring and knowing what's going on the horizon.
That's a really great point, because one of the things I always like to emphasize to people is there's a difference between lobbying and advocacy, and anybody can advocate, but not everybody can lobby. And sometimes it might be better for your association to advocate as opposed to lobbying. I'm a former lobbyist, or maybe recovering lobbyist, but it was a while ago, and policy analyst. So I believe very strongly in that. And so, Bruce, how could your expertise in corporate partnerships and developing resources support what Anne has brought up about having an active government relations or advocacy program?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and really around this theme of empowering smaller organizations. And I know a lot of organizations think that if they're small, it's hard for them to leverage corporate partnerships. How will they get the attention of companies? But companies are looking to have an impact and to be part of organizations. And in many cases, smaller organizations may even have an advantage over large organizations. So I've talked to companies that have gone to conferences with 10,000 people, and the companies say, I'm really looking for 300 people. I can't find them among the 10,000. So a smaller niche organization, and this applies to membership associations, nonprofit organizations, even charities, can often provide a company with more visibility, more ROI than a much larger organization. And companies truly want to be part of, be thought leaders within an organization. So whether the organization needs a toolkit for members, needs data to support advocacy, companies really appreciate an organization coming to them and saying, if you are a corporate partner, here is something we can work on together. We can co-brand, we can do a webinar together, we can advocate together, testify together. So I think there's a lot of connection between what Anne talked about with small organization advocacy and grassroots lobbying and the opportunities for corporate partners in small organizations.
I think you raised some really great points there, Bruce. And one of the things that's most important is that, and I think you've just raised that point, which is that government relations is not and should not be separated in its own silo, that all of the functions of an organization should be cross-pollinating to get that added value. And that, again, is especially important for small associations that have limited resources.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I used to work for an organization that had about 8 staff people, so relatively small. And then the executive director came up with a concept that he called overarching goals. And we basically took a template, and the goal of any department, hard to say departments when there are only 8 staff people, the role of any function within the organization, how did that overlay and leverage all other departments? So how could the conference support advocacy and fundraising and corporate partnerships, and how could education support all of the others? So it really looked at any division within the association, whether it was advocacy or policy or corporate partnerships or education or anything else. How does that support every other entity? And he said, that's the only way we can survive as a small organization. We don't have a 4-person department for every one of these functions. We need to do that cross-pollinating, as you said, Anne.
Yeah,
and it also always has, excuse me, Cecilia.
Okay, let's let Agnes say something.
Oh, go ahead.
It almost sounded to me, based on what you just shared, Bruce, that it became part of the strategic goals on how to use advocacy or government relations and the corporate partnership to incorporate it into their strategic plan and strategic goals. And I think that might be a way forward, not only for smaller associations, but also for bigger 501c community. How do you make these priorities that Agnes talked about, that you've talked about, Bruce, as part of their corporate and part of their global strategy or their organizational strategy, regardless of their size. That's what it sounded to me like, and that might be a question that we may want to throw out there. And for both of you, Bruce and Anne, how do you incorporate that as part of the organization strategy?
Yeah,
it's very funny you raised that, Agnes, because that's exactly where I was going to go with my comment. So great minds think alike. I would say that it is critical. I mean, we have to all remember that when we look at the vision and the mission of the organization and the strategic plan that follows that, we then put our dollars and our resources against accomplishing those goals. And it is not for one organization or another, or one function or another to be responsible for that, but it's the entire organization working together and breaking down those silos to see what are the strategies that we can put after each of those goals, and what are the tactics we then apply to each of those strategies.
Right. I think you're right, Anne. It's a strategy. It's also a culture in the organization. So it's a culture where you can't say, oh, that's not my department, that's somebody else's department. Because again, if you truly believe in this concept of overarching goals, everybody can support and help every other program within the organization. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that, and you're right, Agnes, that this is not only for small organizations. I learned the concept of overarching goals in a smaller organization, but it was interesting when I then moved a number of years later to an organization with 80 staff, mm-hmm. It was the same challenge. Oh, that's my department, that's not their department. And so whether it's one person responsible for 3 functions or a department of 4 people in charge of one function, the challenge of silos and that sort of silo culture or mentality will not lead to the success of organizations, especially as things become more and more complicated.
That's a really good point, Bruce, because you come across that no matter how big the staff is. I've worked at different sized organizations. So the first organization I worked at had about 400 employees, and then I've worked at very small ones with maybe 20 or 7. Like when I was at ACHCA with Agnes, we had 7 of us total, and we still did the cross marketing. And our plan was the strategic plan. Our daily business plan is it helping the strategic plan, but breaking down. Oh, sorry. Oh, Taz always has to make a comment on every episode. So, but the point being about breaking down those silos, working together, integrating what we're all doing together, mm-hmm. and supporting each other. And one of the things early in my career somebody told me was the problem at nonprofits is there's a lack of resources as far as like money, mm-hmm. sometimes, and physical resources. And so what people fight over is power and influence. And I think that's where you start getting these silos built up. But when we realize that we're under attack by a lawnmower, I think, outside. But when we realize that the power and influence can be channeled for the good of all of us, I think that's what destroys the silos. So we have about 2 minutes left. So in our episode today. So Anne, do you have any closing thoughts for our audience to take away?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about breaking down silos, and I think that that's critical. But, I want to also leave people with a reminder, and sometimes especially small associations don't really understand that government relations is not synonymous with lobbying. Mm-hmm. Lobbying is only one of many, many tools in the government relations toolbox that can be used to advocate on behalf of your organization and its members to protect their interests.
That's a great point. I love that. And Bruce, any closing thoughts from your
Sure. I think that, we've talked a lot about change in strategy, change in culture in organizations. And again, with a focus on the smaller organizations, I think this can be, in fact, easier for smaller associations. And it's much harder to kind of move that boat of 400 staff people or 100 staff people. But for an organization with 6 or 8 or 10 staff people, they can sit around the conference table in person or virtually and decide to change the way they operate to incorporate government relations and corporate fundraising and education and conferences and education and marketing as a whole overarching goal. and not as a siloed focused organization.
So Agnes, would you like to add something before we wrap up for this week?
No, I think Bruce and Anne have made excellent points, and there is great potential here for smaller and larger associations alike globally to really look at how they can take some of these ideas that Anne and Bruce have shared with us this morning and use it within their organizations to effect change. I think these are very good points, and we might want to share Anne and Bruce's contact so that if they need to reach out to them directly for more insights. Thanks, Cecilia.
Yeah, oh, that's a great point, Agnes. You can contact Anne or Bruce via the Rogue Tulips website. We share their LinkedIn profiles. Or Anne, would you like to share a website?
They can contact me at my email address using for Rogue Tulips, my Gmail, Anne, A-N-N-E, .DarConte, D-A-R-C-O-N-T-E, at gmail.com.
Great. And Bruce, would you like to share your website or email?
Sure. Email website is brucerosenthal.associates, and email address is bruce@brucerosenthal.associates.
Okay. And Taz is saying you can reach me by the starlight
barking loudly.
So sorry about the barking in the background, but I want to again thank Anne and Bruce for joining us today for our 20th episode, because not only was it a great conversation, but it demonstrates the quality of the people that are part of our Rogue Tulips network. We are one of the only formal consulting consortiums out there that bring together all the expertise that you might need to do any project in your association, or if you would like us to manage your association, we have everything we need to help you do that. So as the dogs are having the last word, I think we'll sign off. But as we say every week, hey, we don't say that every week, but every week we say, take 15 minutes and talk with somebody because you might learn something. So thanks, everyone. We'll be taking Labor Day off, but we'll be back September 10th. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.